You are stealing from my franchise to feed a filthy street rat, Chloe! That plate of stale fries and cold meatloaf is company property. You are fired. Hand over your name tag and get out into the rain.
You are stealing from my franchise to feed a filthy street rat, Chloe. That plate of stale fries and cold meatloaf is company property. It is worth exactly $6.99. You are fired. Hand over your name tag and get out into the rain. When the tyrannical, gel-haired night manager screamed those words across the empty diner, he felt a surge of absolute power. He did not notice the ragged, shivering old man sitting quietly in the back booth, staring at the plate of cold food. And he certainly did not realize that the vagrant in the wet, foul-smelling jacket was not a beggar looking for a handout. He was a man who possessed the capital to buy the diner, the franchise, and the manager's entire miserable existence before the sun even came up. Hello, friends. Welcome back to our channel. Before we dive into today's dramatic story of arrogance and absolute justice, please take a second to like this video, share, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Also, tell us in the comments what city or country you are watching from today. Now, let us return to the suffocating tension inside the fluorescent-lit diner at 3:15 in the morning. The air in the Silver Star Diner was thick with the smell of scorched coffee, heavy ammonia floor cleaner, and stale cooking grease. Chloe stood frozen behind the cracked laminate counter. She was 22 years old, physically vibrating from the exhaustion of working a grueling 16-hour double shift. Beneath her faded, ketchup-stained pink uniform, her feet throbbed in cheap, worn-out orthopedic shoes. On the counter next to the cash register lay her phone with a shattered screen. The banking app glowed with a terrifying reality, a checking account balance of $18.12, juxtaposed against a looming, crushing student loan debt of $45,210, $50 for her nursing degree. She needed this job to survive the semester. Towering over her was Marcus. He was a petty, vicious middle manager who wore a cheap, shiny polyester suit that reeked of generic cologne and stale cigarette smoke. His face was flushed with the intoxicating thrill of crushing someone beneath him. Marcus thrived on the night shift. It was the only place in the world where he felt like a king, ruling over a kingdom of cracked vinyl booths and flickering neon signs. "Mr. Marcus, please." Chloe's voice trembled, her hands gripping the edge of the counter to keep from collapsing. That food was sitting under the heat lamp for 4 hours. It was destined for the garbage. The man was freezing outside in the rain. I just wanted to give him something warm. I will pay the $6 out of my tips. What tips? Marcus sneered, slamming his fist onto the counter, making the heavy ceramic coffee mugs rattle. You don't make the rules here, little girl. I do. You broke protocol. You are a thief. Take off the apron and leave. Now. He aggressively reached across the counter, his thick fingers violently snatching the plastic name tag from her chest, tearing the fabric of her uniform. In the back booth, the silent observer watched every single movement. To Marcus, the man was just a piece of human garbage, a hunched figure in a soaked, threadbare wool coat, water dripping from a messy, silver beard onto the scarred Formica table. Just 10 minutes ago, Chloe had gently bypassed Marcus's line of sight, slipping this freezing stranger a plate of leftover food and a steaming cup of black tea, offering him a warm, empathetic smile that defied her own crushing exhaustion. She had no idea she had just served a meal to Sela's Thorn. Beneath the wet, ragged layers of clothing sat the founder and CEO of Thorn Commercial Real Estate. His verified personal net worth was $12, $4 billion. He owned the skyscrapers that defined the city's skyline. Silas did not spend his nights wandering the freezing highways in a torn coat for amusement. He did it out of a profound, paralyzing penance. 10 years ago, before the private jets and the ruthless corporate acquisitions, Sela's had a younger sister named Alina. On a night exactly like this, bitterly cold, raining sideways, her car broke down on a desolate stretch of the interstate. She had no money for a tow. She knocked on the doors of two highway diners, begging to use a phone or simply stay warm. She was chased out by managers exactly like Marcus. She tried to walk home in the freezing downpour. While Silas was sitting in a warm, velvet-lined boardroom negotiating a merger, his sister collapsed from severe hypothermia. The world had looked at a desperate girl in the freezing rain and offered her absolutely nothing. That loss was a permanent, agonizing wound in Silas's chest, a dark abyss that no amount of billions could ever heal. He spent his sleepless nights walking the darkest corners of the city, searching for the empathy the world had cruelly denied his sister. When Chloe handed him that warm plate, risking her own livelihood just to make sure a stranger didn't freeze, she didn't just give him food. She touched the deepest scar in a billionaire's soul. Watching Marcus humiliate this exhausted nursing student, watching the petty manager tear the name tag from her uniform and point toward the freezing storm outside, Silas felt a cold, calculated fury replace his grief. Every single word Marcus spat was a nail in his own financial coffin. Silas slowly pushed the plate of food aside. He did not yell. He did not stand up to cause a scene. He simply reached deep into the lining of his soaked, ruined coat. He bypassed the empty pockets and pulled out a sleek, matte black, encrypted smart device. Not for justice, not for a lesson, but for absolute surgical erasure. In less than 12 hours, Marcus would not just lose his petty title as night manager. He would lose his bank accounts, his leased sports car, and his entire future in the hospitality industry. He would be blacklisted from every commercial property in the state. The very moment Marcus smiled at Chloe's tears was the exact moment a $12 billion empire locked its crosshairs onto his life. Silas tapped the glowing screen once. The mechanism of vengeance was activated. The faint, encrypted glow of the smart device vanished back into the damp, heavy folds of Silas's ruined wool coat. The silent command had been sent, but inside the oppressive, fluorescent-lit confines of the Silver Star Diner, the cruel theater of Marcus's ego had not yet reached its finale. Firing the exhausted nursing student was not enough for him. Marcus needed to completely break her spirit. He needed to assert his absolute dominance over the only domain in the world where he had any power. He looked down at a plastic busing tray resting on the edge of the counter. It was piled high with dirty ceramic coffee mugs, crumpled, syrup-stained napkins, and half-eaten crusts of cherry pie. A cruel, calculated smirk spread across his face. Without breaking eye contact with Chloe, Marcus casually raised his thick hand and shoved the tray violently off the edge. The heavy plastic and thick ceramics slammed into the checkered linoleum floor with a deafening crash. Cold, sludgy brown coffee splashed across the white tiles, soaking directly into the fabric of Chloe's worn-out orthopedic shoes. "Oops," Marcus mocked, his voice dripping with venomous sarcasm. He pointed a stubby finger at a dirty mop bucket resting in the corner of the kitchen. "You think you can just steal from my register and walk out the door? Grab the mop. You are going to scrub this floor until you can see your miserable reflection in it. Consider it the late fee for your little $6 charity crime." Chloe stared at the mess at her feet. The cold coffee seeping through her socks sent a freezing chill up her spine. She looked at her trembling hands, scarred from chemical disinfectants used in her nursing clinicals. She had endured 16 hours of verbal abuse, burned hands, and aching joints just to afford her upcoming pharmacology textbook. She had nothing left to give. Slowly, she lifted her head. Her eyes, usually soft and accommodating, hardened with the final, desperate resolve of someone who had been pushed entirely over the edge. "No," Chloe whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the neon sign in the window. Marcus blinked, genuinely taken aback. "Excuse me, what did you just say to me?" "I said no," Chloe repeated, louder this time. She reached back, untying the knot of her ketchup-stained pink apron, letting it drop unceremoniously into the puddle of spilled coffee. "You fired me. I don't work for you anymore. Clean it up yourself." She turned her back on him, walking toward the employee break room to retrieve her coat. Marcus's face flushed a violent, ugly shade of crimson. The fragile illusion of his absolute authority had just been shattered by a 22-year-old girl in front of an empty diner. His bruised ego immediately mutated into blind, aggressive rage. "You do not turn your back on me." Marcus roared. He vaulted his heavy frame around the edge of the counter, lunging at her with alarming speed. He reached out and violently grabbed Chloe's left wrist. His thick fingers dug ruthlessly into her skin, his grip tight enough to instantly cut off the circulation. Chloe let out a sharp gasp of pain, twisting her body in a desperate panic to break free. But the 240-pound manager easily overpowered her, yanking her back toward the spilled coffee. "You are going to get on your knees and clean this floor right now, or I swear to God I will call the police and have you arrested for theft." Marcus spat, his face mere inches from hers, reeking of stale tobacco. He fully intended to drag her to the floor, but he never got the chance. The transition from absolute silence to devastating kinetic action happened in the blink of an eye. The old, shivering vagrant in the back booth suddenly ceased to be a fragile beggar. Silas moved with a terrifying, calibrated fluidity that belonged on a military training ground, not in a cheap highway diner. He didn't shout. He didn't charge wildly. He simply closed the 20-foot gap between the booth and the counter in 3 long, silent strides. As he moved, Silas's right hand seamlessly picked up a heavy, thick-walled ceramic diner mug from an empty table. He did not raise it to smash it over the manager's head. He had no intention of drawing blood or creating a chaotic brawl. He wanted to deliver a pure, agonizing shock to the system. Coming up directly behind Marcus, Silas bypassed the manager's peripheral vision. With cold, surgical precision, Silas drove the solid, heavy base of the ceramic mug downward in a sharp, concentrated arc, striking directly onto the radial nerve cluster of Marcus's exposed forearm. The impact was a dull, heavy thud. There was no broken skin, no shattered bone, but the sheer kinetic force instantly short-circuited the nerve pathways in Marcus's arm. Marcus let out a high-pitched, guttural yelp as a blinding flash of electrical pain shot from his elbow straight up into his neck. His thick fingers involuntarily sprang open, instantly releasing Chloe's wrist. His entire right arm went completely dead, dropping uselessly to his side like a heavy piece of wet meat. The manager stumbled backward, clutching his paralyzed limb against his chest, his eyes wide with absolute shock and terror. He stared at the homeless man, completely unable to process what had just happened. The frail old man in the wet coat stood perfectly still, his posture completely straight, his eyes radiating a cold, dead authority that made the temperature in the diner plummet. "Do not touch her again," Silas said. His voice was not a yell. It was a low, resonant rumble, the voice of a man who commanded boardrooms filled with the most ruthless executives on Wall Street. Marcus's chest heaved as he backed up against the cash register, his bravado entirely shattered by the raw, terrifying presence of the vagrant. But as the initial shock faded, his humiliation rapidly boiled over into a pathetic, desperate anger. "You assaulted me!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking hysterically. He pointed his left hand at Silas. "I'm calling the cops. You are going to rot in a county jail cell, you piece of street trash, and you—" He turned his furious gaze to Chloe. "I am blacklisting you. You will never work in this town again. You are completely finished." Chloe didn't wait to hear the rest. Terrified of the escalating violence and the threat of the police, she scrambled backward. She grabbed her thin, faded thrift store coat from the hook by the door. She didn't even grab her umbrella. She just pushed through the heavy glass doors and ran out into the freezing 3 a.m. downpour. Through the greasy, rain-streaked window of the diner, Silas watched her go. He watched the exhausted nursing student wrap her thin coat tightly around her shoulders. Her head bowed against the bitter, freezing wind as she disappeared into the pitch-black darkness of the highway. The memory of his sister walking into a storm, exactly like this one, clawed at his throat. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to run after Chloe, to put her in a warm car, to hand her a stack of cash and make her pain disappear instantly. But Silas did not move. Handing her cash would not fix the disease. It would only treat the symptom. Marcus was the disease. The cruel, exploitative system that allowed men like Marcus to crush desperate people for sport was the disease. Silas knew that to truly protect Chloe, he couldn't just give her money. He had to burn Marcus's entire world down to the foundation, leaving absolutely nothing behind. Silas turned his cold gaze back to the manager, who was frantically dialing 911 on his cell phone with his clumsy left hand. "Enjoy your diner, Marcus," Silas whispered softly, a promise of absolute destruction woven into the words. Without another glance, Silas turned and walked calmly out the glass doors, stepping into the freezing rain, leaving the arrogant manager completely unaware of the multi-billion-dollar avalanche that was already hurtling toward him in the dark. The freezing rain hit Silas the moment he stepped through the heavy glass doors of the Silver Star Diner, but he did not shiver. The bitter wind howling off the dark highway gnawed at his soaked, tattered wool coat, yet Silas felt nothing but a cold, radiating heat building within his chest. It was the heat of a dormant apex predator waking up. He did not walk down the shoulder of the highway where Chloe had fled. He knew his security detail was already tracking her via satellite overlay, ensuring she made it safely to her apartment. Instead, Silas turned the corner of the decaying building, walking past the overflowing, grease-stained dumpsters into a pitch-black, narrow alleyway. The alley was seemingly empty, swallowed by the 3:30 a.m. darkness. But as Silas took his fifth step into the shadows, a pair of sharp lead headlights snapped on, piercing the downpour. Idling silently in the rain was a massive, custom-built, armored Cadillac Escalade. The matte black paint absorbed the faint ambient light, making the vehicle look like a shadow cast in steel. As Silas approached, the heavy, ballistic glass rear door swung open. A man in a perfectly tailored dark suit and a discreet earpiece stepped out, holding a large, black umbrella over the open door. It was Vance, Silas's personal head of security and chief operational fixer. "Good evening, Mr. Thorne," Vance said, his voice completely devoid of judgment as he looked at the filthy, dripping vagrant standing before him. Silas did not reply. He stepped into the immaculate, climate-controlled, leather-lined cabin of the SUV. He reached up and ruthlessly stripped off the foul-smelling, soaked wool coat and the grime-covered beanie, tossing them into a sealed biometric compartment in the floorboard. Underneath the rags, Silas wore a pristine, fitted dark cashmere turtleneck. He ran a hand through his damp silver hair, instantly transforming from a pathetic beggar into a man who dictated the financial heartbeat of the state. "The tower," Silas commanded, his voice dropping an octave rich with terrifying, unchecked authority. "And wake up the acquisition board." "They are already waiting for you, sir," Vance replied, climbing into the front seat as the SUV seamlessly accelerated into the storm. The transition from the squalor of the highway to the glittering pinnacle of wealth was absolute. 20 minutes later, the armored Escalade glided into the subterranean high-security parking vault of Thorne Holdings, a monolithic 80-story glass skyscraper that dominated the city's financial district. It was exactly 4:02 a.m. The rest of the city was in a deep, dead sleep. But as Silas stepped out of the private executive elevator on the top floor, the glass-walled war room was ablaze with activity. A team of 6 elite corporate analysts, cutthroat defense attorneys, and senior financial officers stood sharply at attention around a massive obsidian conference table. They wore crisp designer suits, their laptops glowing, entirely unfazed by being summoned in the middle of the night. When you worked directly for Silas Thorne, you did not sleep when the sun went down. You slept when he allowed it. Silas walked to the head of the table. He did not sit. He did not offer greetings. "I want the complete property and corporate profile on a commercial lot located off Highway 9, Silas ordered, his eyes locked onto the massive digital display covering the far wall. The Silver Star Diner. Morgan, his ruthless lead data analyst, didn't ask questions. Her fingers flew across her mechanical keyboard. Within 10 seconds, the enormous screen flickered, projecting a high-definition satellite image of the rundown diner, accompanied by a cascading wall of financial data, property deeds, and corporate registry files. The property is owned by a mid-level regional holding group, Horizon Estates, Morgan reported smoothly, her eyes scanning the data streams. The diner itself is a franchise operation. The current leaseholder and general manager is a man named Marcus Keller. The property is heavily leveraged, carrying a high-interest commercial mortgage through a secondary regional bank. Silas stared at the glowing digital photograph of Marcus Keller on the screen. The gelled hair, the smug, arrogant smile. The man who had violently grabbed a terrified nursing student and threatened her with jail time over a $6 plate of garbage. A man that arrogant does not operate a clean business, Silas stated coldly. Hack the franchise ledger, bypass their internal firewalls, and cross-reference their digital tip pool with their physical payroll. I want to see the blood he is drawing from his own people. Initiating the breach, Morgan said. For 3 minutes, the only sound in the war room was the soft, rhythmic hum of the servers and the frantic clicking of keyboards. Then, the numbers on the massive screen turned a violently stark shade of red. Morgan paused, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose, her expression hardening in genuine disgust. "You were right, Mr. Thorne," Morgan said, her voice laced with ice. "He is bleeding them dry. For the past 4 years, Marcus Keller has been systematically altering the digital timesheets. He is skimming roughly 30% off the waitstaff's credit card tips before they are processed into payroll. He shifts the stolen funds into a ghost LLC registered under his ex-wife's name." The room grew eerily quiet. Stealing from minimum-wage workers working graveyard shifts was a profound level of scum that even these ruthless corporate sharks found repulsive. "Furthermore," Vance added from the doorway, holding a glowing tablet, "I just pulled municipal records. The diner has 8 severe health code violations pending, including black mold in the ventilation and raw sewage backup in the kitchen. Keller has been paying a local health inspector $500 a month in cash to bury the reports." Silas slowly leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the cold obsidian table. The memory of his sister, Alina, shivering in the rain, being turned away by a man exactly like Marcus Keller, surged through his veins. Marcus wasn't just a petty bully. He was a parasite. He was the embodiment of the cruel, indifferent system that crushed the desperate people at the bottom. Silas looked up, his eyes entirely dead of mercy. "Buy it," Silas commanded softly. The absolute finality in his tone sent a chill through the room. The senior acquisitions director cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, Horizon Estates will not sell a single, isolated lot. Their portfolio is strictly bundled. To acquire the diner, We would have to initiate a hostile takeover of their entire regional commercial block. The premium would cost us upwards of $35 million in liquid capital, for a diner that generates a fraction of. I do not care if it costs 50 million, Silas interrupted, his voice echoing off the glass walls like a physical blow. I want their entire commercial debt portfolio bought out by 6:00 a.m. I want the franchise corporate rights transferred directly to Thorn Holdings by 7:00 a.m. I want the regional labor board and a federal health inspector standing by on my mark. Silas turned his gaze back to the smug, digital face of Marcus Keller on the screen. We are going to buy the ground he stands on, the walls that surround him, and the very air he breathes. When the sun comes up today, Marcus Keller will own absolutely nothing. The hesitation in the room vanished instantly. The analysts and lawyers scrambled into absolute overdrive, picking up phones, authorizing massive offshore wire transfers, and drafting immediate acquisition documents. The $12 billion machine had been fully unleashed, and its crosshairs were locked dead center on a cheap, arrogant manager who had made the fatal mistake of threatening an angel in the presence of a god. By 9:00 a.m., the torrential rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a bleak, suffocating gray overcast that hung heavily over the highway. Inside the Silver Star Diner, the morning breakfast rush was in full swing. The air was a thick, greasy fog of sizzling bacon, burnt hash browns, and the endless, grating clatter of cheap aluminum silverware against heavy ceramic plates. Marcus Keller strutted through the narrow aisles of the dining room like a victorious general surveying a conquered territory. He was still wearing the same shiny polyester suit from the night before, though he had aggressively reapplied his generic, overpowering cologne to mask the smell of stale sweat. He was riding an intense, intoxicating high. Firing Chloe, breaking a young, ambitious nursing student and throwing her out into the freezing rain, had fed his massive ego. It reminded everyone in the building exactly who held the power of life and death over their paychecks. He stopped by the Waitress station, where Brenda, a 50-year-old single mother who had worked at the diner for a decade, was frantically trying to pour 4 cups of coffee at once. "Where is Chloe, Mr. Marcus?" Brenda asked, her voice tight with stress as she looked at the overflowing ticket wheel. "She was supposed to cover the first 2 hours of my shift so I could take my son to school." Marcus leaned against the counter, picking his teeth with a plastic stirrer. A cruel, utterly satisfied smirk stretched across his face. "Chloe is no longer with the company, Brenda," Marcus announced loudly, intentionally projecting his voice so the other waitstaff and the line cooks could hear him over the sizzle of the grill. "I caught the little thief stealing company property in the middle of the night. I fired her on the spot and threw her out. Let that be a permanent lesson to all of you. You steal from my diner, even a single French fry, and I will destroy your livelihood. Now stop asking stupid questions and get those tables cleared." Brenda looked down, her face pale, biting her lip to keep from arguing. She knew Chloe wasn't a thief. Everyone knew Chloe was the kindest girl in the building, but no one dared speak up. They all lived paycheck to paycheck, terrified of the tyrant in the cheap suit. Satisfied with the blanket of fear he had successfully draped over his staff, Marcus retreated to his sanctuary, the manager's back office. The room was a claustrophobic, windowless box at the rear of the kitchen. The walls were stained yellow from years of indoor chain smoking, and the desk was buried under a mountain of sticky, grease-coated invoices and health code warnings he had never bothered to read. Marcus locked the heavy metal door behind him, the deadbolt snapping into place with a heavy clack. He sat down in his squeaking leather chair, exhaling a long sigh of pure contentment. He reached into the bottom drawer of his desk, pushing aside a half-empty bottle of cheap whiskey, and pulled out a thick, unmarked manila envelope. Inside was the real reason Marcus loved the night shift. He dumped the contents onto the desk. A massive pile of crumpled $1, $5, and $20 bills spilled out. This was the ghost tax. Every night, Marcus manually went into the diner's ancient point-of-sale system and deleted a fraction of the waitstaff's credit card tips, shifting the balance to voided cash transactions. The corporate franchise owners never noticed, and the exhausted waitresses just assumed the customers were stingy. Marcus began flattening the bills, licking his thick thumb as he counted. 100, 200, 500. By the time he finished, he had successfully skimmed $840 from the pockets of single mothers and desperate college students, just from the weekend shift. A little bonus for the king, Marcus chuckled to himself, stuffing the thick wad of cash into his suit jacket. He felt utterly invincible. He was a master manipulator, pulling the strings of his little empire, entirely untouchable. He reached for his cell phone to call his corrupt buddy at the health department to joke about the crying nursing student he had crushed hours earlier. But before his thumb could hit the dial icon, the surface of his coffee began to move. It was a subtle vibration at first, just a series of concentric, rippling circles in the dark, sludgy liquid resting on his desk. Then, the heavy metal filing cabinet in the corner gave a faint, metallic rattle. The floorboards beneath his heavy leather boots began to emit a low, sustained hum. It wasn't an earthquake. It was the synchronized, overwhelming resonance of massive, hyper-engineered engines pulling directly onto the property. Frowning in annoyance, Marcus stood up and walked out of the office, pushing past the line cooks in the kitchen and stepping out into the main dining area. He aggressively pushed his way through a crowd of confused customers who had all stopped eating and were staring out the large, grease-streaked front windows. "What is everyone looking at? Eat your food." Marcus barked. He shoved past Brenda and pressed his face to the glass, fully prepared to yell at a rogue delivery truck driver. The words completely died in his throat. Rolling onto the cracked, weed-choked asphalt of the Silver Star Diner parking lot was not a delivery truck. It was a fleet of absolute, overwhelming corporate dominance. 4 identical, matte black Mercedes Maybach sedans glided onto the property with the terrifying, silent grace of apex predators. They were flanked by 2 massive, armored corporate SUVs. The vehicles did not park in the designated white lines. They moved with tactical, military precision, entirely surrounding the diner. 2 of the Maybachs parked horizontally across the main entrance and exit of the lot, completely blocking any vehicle from leaving. The lead armored SUV pulled forward aggressively, stopping mere inches from Marcus's leased, bright yellow Corvette, completely boxing the sports car in against a concrete barrier. The sheer visual contrast was staggering. The ultra-luxury, aerospace-grade aluminum and polished obsidian glass of the multi-million-dollar fleet sat in stark, alien defiance against the decaying neon signs and overflowing dumpsters of the cheap highway diner. For the first time that morning, a tiny, icy prick of unease touched the back of Marcus's neck. All at once, the doors of the vehicles opened in perfect unison. Over a dozen men and women stepped out onto the wet asphalt. They did not look like health inspectors. They did not look like regional franchise managers. They were dressed in immaculate, bespoke dark suits. They wore discreet earpieces and moved with a cold, synchronized efficiency that radiated absolute authority. "Hey, you can't park there." Marcus suddenly yelled, his massive ego rapidly trying to crush the rising panic in his chest. He slapped his hand against the diner window. "This is private property." He turned to Brenda, his face flushing red with indignation. "Watch the register. I'm going to go tow every single one of those pretentious, overpriced cars myself." Marcus aggressively pushed open the heavy glass doors and stormed out into the cold morning air, adjusting the lapels of his cheap polyester suit. He was fully prepared to scream, to threaten, and to assert his dominance over whoever these arrogant rich people thought they were. He had absolutely no idea that he was not walking out to a parking dispute. He was walking directly to his own execution. "Move these oversized hearses right now, or I am having every single one of them towed to the city impound." Marcus bellowed, his voice echoing across the cracked asphalt. He marched aggressively toward the closest Maybach, puffing out his chest to project a false sense of absolute dominance. He expected the men in suits to scramble, to offer frantic apologies, and to hand him thick wads of cash for the inconvenience. That was how the world worked in Marcus's mind. He was the manager, this was his property, but the men in the dark suits did not flinch. They did not even look at him. They stood like obsidian statues, their eyes scanning the perimeter with cold, military detachment. Vance, the towering head of security, stepped smoothly into Marcus's path. He didn't raise his hands or assume a fighting stance. He merely stood there, an immovable wall of tailored muscle, looking down at the greasy, sweating manager with a stare devoid of any human empathy. "Sir, you are obstructing the path of the chairman. Step aside," Vance said, his voice flat and mechanical. "The chairman, I don't care if he's the President of the United States." Marcus spat, a bead of nervous sweat trickling down his neck. "This is a private franchise lot. I am the general manager of this." The heavy, ballistic glass rear door of the lead Maybach swung open with a quiet, expensive click. Marcus's tirade died instantly in his throat. The man who stepped out of the luxury vehicle was a walking manifestation of absolute, unchecked corporate supremacy. Silas Thorne wore a sharp, custom-tailored $15,000 Tom Ford suit that absorbed the morning light. His silver hair was immaculately styled, and his posture was perfectly rigid. He did not wear a heavy gold Rolex or flashy jewelry. His wealth was woven into the very fabric of his presence. Silas did not look at Marcus. He didn't even acknowledge the manager's existence. He simply adjusted his silk tie, his cold, piercing eyes locked onto the greasy front windows of the Silver Star Diner. "Secure all exits. Nobody leaves," Silas commanded quietly to his security detail. Without a single glance at the bewildered manager, Silas walked purposefully past Marcus. Vance stepped forward, gently but firmly pressing a massive hand against Marcus's chest, forcing the manager to walk backward, pushing him back through the heavy glass doors and into his own restaurant. Inside the diner, the atmosphere had shifted from a noisy breakfast rush to absolute, terrified silence. The clatter of silverware had stopped entirely. Customers sat frozen in their vinyl booths. The line cooks peered nervously through the kitchen pass. Brenda, the veteran waitress, stood completely rigid behind the cash register, her eyes wide with shock as the army of corporate lawyers and security operatives flooded the narrow aisles. Silas stopped in the exact center of the checkered linoleum floor. He looked down. There, near the counter, was a faint, sticky brown stain, the remnants of the coffee Marcus had deliberately knocked onto the floor just 6 hours earlier. The exact spot where an exhausted nursing student had been humiliated for showing kindness. Silas's jaw tightened. The temperature in the diner seemed to plummet by 10 degrees. Marcus, finally breaking free from Vance's imposing shadow, pushed his way to the front. His face was a mask of desperate, humiliated rage. He was losing control of his kingdom in front of his entire staff. "Listen to me very carefully, whoever you think you are," Marcus yelled, his voice cracking slightly as he pointed a trembling finger at Silas. "You have exactly 3 seconds to get out of my restaurant before I call the police, and have you all arrested for criminal trespassing." Silas slowly turned his head. His cold, dead eyes locked onto Marcus's flushed face. "Your restaurant?" Silas asked softly, the voice. It wasn't a yell. It was a low, resonant, terrifyingly familiar rumble. It hit Marcus like a physical blow to the chest. The manager's breath hitched, his eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated horror as he stared at the billionaire's face. The grime was gone, the ragged beard was neatly trimmed, and the foul-smelling wool coat was replaced by Italian silk. But the eyes, the cold, predatory eyes that had paralyzed him in the middle of the night, were exactly the same. "You." Marcus whispered, the color completely draining from his face, leaving him a sickening shade of pale gray. "You were the vagrant." "I told you to enjoy your diner, Marcus," Silas said, his voice entirely devoid of mercy. "Because your time was up." Silas gave a subtle nod. From the ranks of the corporate operatives, a sharp, fiercely intelligent lead attorney named Caldwell stepped forward. He carried a thick, leather-bound portfolio. He didn't speak to Marcus. He didn't even look him in the eye. Caldwell simply raised the portfolio and slammed it down onto the greasy laminate counter with a deafening, authoritative crack. "Marcus Keller," Caldwell began, his voice projecting clearly across the silent diner. "As of 6:15 a.m. this morning, Thorne Commercial Real Estate Holdings initiated a hostile, zero-hour acquisition of the Horizon Estates regional portfolio. We have successfully purchased the deed to this land, the structural rights to this building, and the master corporate franchise license of the Silver Star Diner." Caldwell flipped open the heavy binder, revealing a stack of freshly notarized legal documents bearing massive corporate seals. "You do not own this restaurant," Caldwell stated coldly. "You do not lease this restaurant. As of 2 hours ago, you are standing on private property owned exclusively by Mr. Silas Thorne, and you are officially trespassing." Marcus stumbled backward, his back hitting the edge of a vinyl booth, his mind completely short-circuited. "No. No, that's impossible. You can't just buy a commercial block in the middle of the night. There are contracts, there are lease agreements." "Your lease agreement," Caldwell continued without missing a single beat, pulling a second sheet of paper from the binder, "was terminated at 7:00 a.m. under the gross negligence and criminal conduct clause." The attorney turned slightly, making sure the entire waitstaff could hear him. "A forensic audit of your localized point-of-sale system, conducted at 4:30 a.m., revealed a systematic 4-year history of wage theft. You have been actively skimming 30% of your employees' credit card tips and funneling the capital into an offshore LLC." A collective gasp echoed from the waitstaff. Brenda dropped a coffee pot, the glass shattering against the floor, but nobody moved. The waitresses stared at Marcus, their fear instantly transforming into raw, burning hatred. "Furthermore," Caldwell added, his tone dripping with absolute disgust, "the local labor board, the state health department, and the IRS have already received our preliminary findings. Federal marshals are currently freezing your bank accounts and seizing your assets, including the leased Corvette parked outside. You are completely liquidated." Marcus began to hyperventilate. His chest heaved violently beneath his cheap polyester suit. He reached into his pocket, his trembling fingers brushing against the thick wad of $840 in stolen cash he had counted just 20 minutes ago. It was suddenly worthless. His career was dead. His freedom was about to be taken away. Everything he had built through intimidation and cruelty had been vaporized in a matter of hours by the man standing perfectly still in the center of the room. The utter, crushing reality of his total destruction finally broke Marcus's mind. The cowardice that usually governed his actions was completely overridden by a blind, hysterical, animalistic panic. He realized he was not just fired. He was going to federal prison. With a guttural, desperate scream, Marcus spun around, his eyes locking wildly onto the open kitchen pass. He wasn't going down in front of his staff. He wasn't going to let this billionaire humiliate him. Marcus vaulted over the low counter, his heavy boots crashing into the kitchen, his hands desperately grabbing for a weapon. The stainless steel doors of the kitchen violently slammed open, bouncing off their hinges as Marcus Keller tore through the narrow cooking space. The two morning line cooks, terrified by the sudden explosion of chaos, dropped their spatulas and pressed themselves flat against the cold metal prep tables to get out of his way. Marcus was operating on pure, unadulterated animal panic. His mind, unable to process the absolute destruction of his life, had devolved into a primal state of fight or flight. And with the Maybachs completely blocking his escape, there was nowhere to run. His frantic eyes darted across the kitchen, landing on the heavy, industrial gas range. Resting on the grates was a massive black cast-iron frying pan, thick with sizzling bacon grease. With a guttural roar of pure desperation, Marcus grabbed the searing hot handle. He ignored the burning pain in his palm. He spun around, vaulting back over the food pass and crashing heavily onto the checkered linoleum floor of the main dining area, the heavy iron pan raised high above his head like a medieval club. "You ruined my life." Marcus screamed, his voice tearing at the seams as he charged directly at the billionaire standing in the center of the room. "I'll kill you. I'll kill all of you." The customers screamed, scrambling desperately out of their booths to avoid the incoming violence. Silas Thorne did not move a single inch. He did not flinch. He did not even blink. He stood with his hands casually clasped behind his back, his posture radiating the absolute, terrifying calm of a man who commanded an army. He didn't need to move. His shield was already there. Vance, the towering head of security, stepped effortlessly into the space between Silas and the charging, 240-pound manager. The operative did not reach for a firearm. He did not brace for a messy brawl. He executed his duty with terrifying, mechanical precision. As Marcus brought the heavy cast-iron pan swinging down in a wild, lethal arc, Vance flawlessly slipped inside the manager's guard. The movement was a blur of calibrated kinetic energy. Vance raised his left forearm, catching Marcus's wrist just below the pan with a sharp, concussive block that stopped the heavy iron dead in its tracks. Before Marcus could even process the parry, Vance's right hand shot forward, securing a vice-like grip on the manager's collar. Using Marcus's own massive, aggressive momentum entirely against him, Vance pivoted sharply on his heel. He twisted Marcus's trapped arm outward, forcing the manager to instantly drop the iron pan. It clattered loudly against the tiles, splattering hot grease across the floor. In one continuous, unbroken motion, Vance swept his heavy tactical boot directly behind Marcus's legs and violently shoved downward. Marcus's center of gravity completely vanished. He crashed onto the hard linoleum floor with a bone-rattling thud that shook the nearby tables. The impact knocked the wind entirely out of his lungs, replacing his furious roar with a pathetic, wheezing gasp. Before Marcus could even attempt to struggle, Vance dropped a heavy knee directly between his shoulder blades, pinning the massive man flat against the floor. With lightning speed, Vance yanked both of Marcus's arms behind his back, securing his wrists tightly with thick, industrial-grade zip ties. The entire scuffle lasted less than 4 seconds. Marcus lay pinned to the greasy tiles, his shiny polyester suit stained and ruined. He squirmed pathetically against the unyielding weight of the security operative, his face pressed against the cold floor. He began to sob, a loud, ugly, humiliating sound. "You ruined me," Marcus wept, his massive ego entirely shattered. "I have nothing. I have nothing left." Silas slowly walked forward, the polished leather of his custom Italian Oxford stopping mere inches from Marcus's face. He looked down at the weeping manager with a gaze so cold it could freeze the ocean. "I did not ruin you, Marcus," Silas said, his low voice echoing through the silent diner. "You built a kingdom out of cruelty and theft. I merely provided the mirror. The universe does not tolerate men who crush the innocent for sport. Today, it simply sent me to collect the debt." Outside, the wail of police sirens cut through the cold morning air. Two local precinct cruisers, fully coordinated by Thorne Holdings' legal team, pulled aggressively onto the cracked asphalt, their red and blue lights flashing violently against the dark, tinted glass of the Maybachs. 4 uniformed officers rushed into the diner. They did not question Silas or his men. They walked straight over to the subdued manager. Vance stepped back, allowing the officers to haul Marcus roughly to his feet. The zip ties were replaced by the heavy, cold steel of police handcuffs. "Marcus Keller, you are under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and multiple counts of extortion." The lead officer recited the Miranda rights as they dragged the broken, sobbing manager toward the exit. Every single employee, from the line cooks to the waitresses, watched in stunned, breathless silence as the man who had terrorized them for years was paraded out the front doors in disgrace. He was shoved into the back of a squad car, the door slamming shut on his entire existence. The diner was dead quiet. Silas turned slowly, facing the terrified waitstaff huddled near the register. Brenda instinctively took a step back, shielding the younger waitresses behind her. They had just witnessed a billionaire ruthlessly dismantle a man in under an hour. They had no idea what he planned to do with them. Silas's cold, predatory demeanor instantly softened. The ice in his eyes melted into a profound, respectful warmth. "No one here is losing their job today," Silas announced, his voice carrying a gentle, reassuring authority. "As of this morning, this property belongs to the Thorne Foundation. We are closing the diner immediately for a complete structural and sanitary renovation." The waitresses exchanged panicked glances. Closing the diner meant no wages. "However," Silas continued, raising a hand to quell their fears, "every single one of you will remain on full corporate payroll during the 6-month renovation. Furthermore, my legal team has fully audited Marcus's stolen tip ledger. Every dollar he stole from you over the last 4 years will be reimbursed directly to your bank accounts by sunset today, accompanied by a 500% interest penalty, paid entirely from Marcus's liquidated personal assets." Brenda let out a sudden, overwhelming sob, covering her mouth with her hands. The younger waitresses began to cry, hugging each other. The crushing financial weight they had all been carrying had just vanished into thin air. Silas walked directly up to the counter, pulling a sleek titanium pen from his suit jacket. He looked at Brenda, his expression intensely focused. 10 hours ago, a young nursing student working the night shift sacrificed her own security to feed a freezing stranger, Silas said softly, the memory of his sister briefly flashing in his mind. "I need her address. I have a profound debt to pay." Across the city, 5 miles away from the shattered ruins of Marcus Keller's petty empire, Chloe sat on the edge of a sagging mattress in her freezing, dimly lit apartment. The ancient iron radiator in the corner hissed weakly, completely failing to hold back the morning chill. Still wearing her coffee-stained, torn pink uniform, Chloe stared blankly at the scarred wooden desk in front of her. Piled high were her heavy, impossibly expensive nursing textbooks. Resting on top of them was her cracked smartphone, the screen stubbornly illuminating her terrifying reality. A checking account holding $18.12, and a student loan portal demanding $45,210. $50. A single tear slipped down her cheek, dropping silently onto the cover of her pharmacology book. She had lost her job. Without the diner's income, she would miss her next tuition installment. She would be dropped from the clinical program by Friday. The dream she had literally bled for, working 16-hour double shifts, was dead, all because she couldn't stomach watching an old man freeze. Suddenly, a heavy, authoritative knock echoed on her thin wooden door. Chloe jumped, hastily wiping her eyes. She assumed it was her landlord, coming to aggressively remind her that the rent was due in 3 days. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she unlatched the deadbolt and pulled the door open. She froze completely. Standing in the narrow, peeling hallway of her rundown apartment building was not her landlord. It was a man wearing a breathtakingly sharp, dark Italian suit. Flanking him slightly behind was a massive man with a discreet earpiece, holding a large, black umbrella. Chloe's exhausted mind struggled to process the face of the man standing in front of her. The perfectly styled silver hair, the immaculate posture, but the eyes, the deep, intensely focused eyes, were unmistakable. "You," Chloe whispered, her hand gripping the doorframe to steady herself. "You're the man from the booth." "The vagrant." "My name is Silas Thorne," the billionaire said softly, his voice carrying a profound, quiet respect. He did not step inside uninvited. "And I have come to pay my bill." Chloe stared at him, utterly bewildered. "Your bill, sir? I don't understand. Are you okay? What happened to Marcus?" "Marcus Keller has been permanently removed from the hospitality industry and is currently in federal custody," Silas replied calmly, as if he were discussing the morning weather. "And the Silver Star Diner no longer exists. I bought the commercial block at 6:15 this morning." Chloe's breath hitched. She looked at the towering security guard, then back to the billionaire, realizing with a sudden, overwhelming shock that the freezing, homeless man she had pitied was a titan of industry. Silas reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick, heavy leather portfolio embossed with the golden crest of Thorne Holdings. He gently held it out to her. Trembling, Chloe took the portfolio. She flipped it open. On top was a certified bank document from the Federal Loan Authority. Across the center of the page, stamped in heavy red ink, were the words, "Paid in full balance, $0. Your nursing debt of $45,000 has been completely liquidated," Silas stated, watching the shock wash over her face. "But that is not a gift, Chloe. That is an investment." He pointed to the second document in the folder. It was a pristine corporate contract. "When the diner is demolished next month, my foundation is breaking ground on a state-of-the-art free medical clinic on that exact lot. The Alina Thorne Memorial Clinic," Silas said, his voice thickening with a rare, raw emotion. "It is named after my younger sister. 10 years ago, she was stranded on a highway in the freezing rain. She knocked on doors for help, and men like Marcus turned her away. I lost her that night." Silas stepped closer, looking deeply into Chloe's tear-filled eyes. "For a decade, I have been looking for the person who would have opened the door for her," Silas whispered. "Last night, risking your own livelihood, you opened that door. You didn't just give me a plate of food, Chloe. You gave me peace. You proved to me that light still exists in the dark." Chloe began to weep, the crushing, invisible weight of her poverty and despair instantly vanishing from her shoulders. "I need someone whose empathy cannot be crushed by exhaustion or greedy managers," Silas said, offering a warm, genuine smile. "I want you to finish your degree, and when you graduate, that contract guarantees you the position of executive director at the clinic. You will never have to worry about surviving ever again. Now, your only job is to heal." Chloe dropped the folder, throwing her arms around the billionaire in a sudden, overwhelming embrace, sobbing into the lapel of his $15,000 suit. Silas did not pull away. For the first time in 10 years, the frozen abyss in the billionaire's chest finally thawed. The ghost of his sister was at peace. And that, friends, is the true price of kindness. Marcus Keller measured a human soul for $6, and it cost him his entire empire. Chloe risked everything to help a stranger, and she inherited the world. Never underestimate the power of doing the right thing, because you never know who is watching in the dark. Thank you so much for joining us for this incredible journey of justice. If you loved this story, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let us know your favorite moment in the comments below. Until next time, stay kind and stay vigilant.